It was a strange thing to descend the same stairs I'd climbed so many times before, while carrying the knowledge that, as Christian insisted, I was a lady of English high society. Not only that, but the only heir to an estate older than Hearthwick itself. The last stair ended just beneath the doorway into the tea room, and as we stepped out from the stairwell, Cyril called out, "Stand to." Chairs scraped against the floorboards as the men pushed them back and rose from their tables. It took me a moment to understand what I was seeing. These were not men rising politely at a woman's entrance, but soldiers coming to attention for someone of importance. And then I realized they were doing it for me. Christian told me plainly that in a place such as this, I did not stand only as myself, but as a representative of my family and, by extension, the crown. I thought the notion was an exaggeration at the time, but as every man waited for me to come forward to excuse them, I saw that every word he'd ever said to me was the truth. I spent years learning how to be invisible, and now I was expected to be the center of attention. But I only froze at the doorway, all my composure slipping from me at once. The knowledge of how I should act was there somewhere, faint as a half-remembered melody, how a lady ought to stand, how to greet a room, yet the certainty behind those movements deserted me. Christian shifted beside me, one hand settling at my back while the other closed around my fingers in a manner less comforting than quietly insistent, reminding me that whatever doubt I felt, it wasn't something the moment allowed. And after the subtle correction of his hand, he guided me forward, leaving me little choice but to meet the room. "Gentlemen," he said, "Lady Grace Rowen of Blackmere." I sensed the pride he took in the moment, his chin lifting ever so slightly. And that was when I understood that this wasn't only the return of my place in society, but the return of his as well. The long years he spent searching for me, and setting aside whatever life might otherwise have been his, were now finally brought to an end, and with it the honour of his house and name restored. Commandant Pembroke stepped forward to me first, lowering his head and smiling, as though he'd known my name long before I spoke it. Lady Grace. It was nothing more than the acknowledgement of a name, yet in a room such as this, the Commandant's recognition carried its own instruction. The men began to address me then as well, and the difference lay not in their manners, which had always been decent enough, but in the names they chose. "My lady," one said. "Lady Grace," said another. For weeks the soldiers came and went through my door with the familiarity of men who knew the place well enough to treat it as their own, speaking to me as they would any woman who kept their tea hot and their plates filled. Now they chose their words more carefully, not out of unkindness, but with the sort of caution one has when a person's place in the room has suddenly shifted, and no one is quite certain yet how to respond. Christian's hand closed more firmly around mine, reminding me that if I only did as he told me, everything would be all right. He explained why he watched me as he did, why every step I took concerned him as though he were taking it with me. If his family had guarded mine for generations, my acting appropriately reflected on him as well, and I had no desire to let him show poorly after everything he'd done for me. "Christian," I said as I looked up at him for guidance, "may I say something to them?" His attention moved through the room before returning to me and shrugging. Christian wasn't one to deny me anything. With him, the matter was always about propriety, and if something ought to be done, he only expected it would be done properly. "If you wish." I'd imagined this moment more times than I could count. In the long, quiet hours when hope felt foolish, I composed entire conversations in my mind, clever remarks, graceful acknowledgements, something worthy of the day I might stand free amongst them again. Yet when the moment arrived, every one of those careful little speeches deserted me. "I confess," I said at last, "I am uncertain where one begins on an occasion such as this, but I do know what I owe each of you thanks." For so many years, I dared not hope too boldly. Freedom became a distant notion for other people. All this time, I told myself that if I could just hold on one more day, and then one more after that, eventually someone would notice who I was. Yet now the danger had passed, and I would leave this place. The itinerary was already set, and that certainty overwhelmed every effort at composure when I reached for the commandant's hand. "And you did. Thank you so very much for finding me." I reached out to the man closest to me next and laid my hand on his. "It has been my honour to serve you tea these past weeks," I said, glancing towards the tables nearby as I moved on to the next man. "I only wish I had more to give you in return for what you have done for me." Another man waited beside him, and I touched his hand as he lowered his head to me. I recalled a joke he told me once, when the shop was empty and the day felt too long to bear. "But know that I shall remember you in my prayers all my life. Bless you." And the rest of them did as well, each one bowing their head as I set my hand on theirs and moved through them. There were not many of them, 10 or 12 perhaps, but every one of them left some small mark upon my days. A kindness offered, or a burden lightened. I turned towards the table and reached for the tea service, because I couldn't bear the thought of letting that final little offering sit untouched. "Well," I said, laying my hand upon the pot, "we simply cannot let all this go to waste, can we?" Before I could lift it, Sean leaned over the table and took hold of the handle, easing the teapot from my hand. "Begging your pardon, milady," he said. He set it back on the tray and drew the service towards himself. "But I think you've done quite enough, so allow me." Another of Christian's men pulled out a chair for me and motioned towards it. "Time you sat down and let someone else do the serving, ma'am." Sean carried the tray back towards the counter to set it right, and the others began drawing chairs from nearby tables and bringing them closer. One soldier rocked forward, resting his chin on his hand and shrugging. "So tell us, Lady Grace," he said. "What's the first thing you plan to do when you get home?" I turned the question over and brushed the loose strand of hair back from my face, searching the places in memory that didn't punish the effort of looking. "It has been so long," I said. "I can hardly remember what I once did for amusement." Most of my earlier life had been driven from me, piece by piece, by hands far less kind than those gathered round the table now. Yet one place returned easily for whatever reason. But I do recall how I enjoyed shopping on Bond Street quite a bit. A ripple of laughter moved through the table. Near the post beside me, Cyril shifted where he leaned and nudged Christian with his elbow. "I dare say you will need to keep a firm hold on your note case, Ashcombe." The matter between Christian and me remained far from official in my mind. He spoke of seeing to my welfare, yet the notion that I might truly be relieved of such concerns after so many years of struggle still felt unreal. Christian, for his part, appeared unbothered by Cyril's suggestion. A faint smile touched his mouth, only the smallest concession. Yet he did nothing to correct the assumption that he'd be paying my way from now on. If anything, the pride in his expression suggested the thought didn't displease him in the least. "When you are settled," Cyril said, laying his hand on his chest, "my family and I would be honoured if you and Ashcombe would stay with us in London." The thought struck me as rather funny. I hadn't set foot beyond the limits of the town in all the years I'd been there, and now I already had a holiday planned with Christian's old school friend. But the truth of it was that going anywhere at all sounded lovely, and if Christian were to come as well, I suspected the journey would be all the better for it. So I nodded and said, "I should enjoy that very much." Sean returned with the tray of tea and laid it beside me. "If you're taking suggestions, Brighton's the place to see." "Brighton," I said. It was a curious thing, recognizing something before the reason for it returned. I knew of Brighton. I was certain that I did. Yet the memory attached to it lay somewhere farther back. For a time, there was only the faint impression of distance, like looking towards something set far away and not yet quite clear to the eye. Then, little by little, it came into focus. "Best seaside in England," he said as he poured the milk in. I thought I'd never remember my father's face, but he stood before me suddenly with such clarity that I could almost have believed I'd seen him only yesterday. Yes, Father promised to take me there as soon as we returned from this trip. The entire room went still. I didn't mean to say it, and I'm not certain I did. The words came as though they still belonged to the little girl, repeating the last promise her father gave before the world turned against them both, and they all seemed to understand that much without being told. It hadn't been my intention to trouble them with my old sorrows after all they'd done for me. So, as I always seemed to do in moments when I didn't know what to say next, I looked to Christian to save me before I made an even bigger fool of myself. "Can we go, Christian?" It was only a slight pause, but the look he gave me told me he was quite pleased that I had asked him. "Of course. As often as you wish," he said. The conversation went on after that, the room returning to an ordinary rhythm again. My fingers curled around the cup in front of me as they chatted about their favourite football clubs and ales, and I let my eyes wander towards the windows. But as the afternoon light faded into a dimmer pink evening, so my mind relaxed and my eyes went distant until I was somewhere else entirely. Some narrow road leading to a church in the distance stretched ahead of me, packed earth and loose white pebbles crunching beneath my tiny patent leather shoes. The air was sharp with spring's cold, every breath a cloud of steam. A sudden gust of wind tugged at my coat, and I hugged myself tighter to keep warm. But then another coat smelling of rosemary and starch settled across my back and swallowed me. When my eyes focused again, it was not the road of that memory I found before me, but Christian standing in the tea room. He lifted his hand to Cyril to interrupt their conversation when he noticed me daydreaming and asked, "Are you all right, my darling?" The scent of rosemary lingered still as that old memory drifted off, and I realized the coat that fell across my shoulders was real and had been his. I couldn't recall when he'd first begun doing such things for me, only that it felt familiar and right, as though I'd once known to expect it. And so, I nodded at him and smiled, my hand drifting back to the place at my shoulders where his coat once rested.